and welcome to the Untitled Film Podcast with Callum and Johnny. I'm Callum.
And I'm fucking Cage!
Wow, that was too much. That was too much. I'm really Johnny.
And I'm really Callum.
Or are you Nick Cage?
I'm Nick effing and Jeffing Cage.
If you say so.
Sorry, Rob, you're going to be the one that's going to have to not blow out people's eardrums with that.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah, good luck with that.
I'd just cut the whole sequence out if I was you. Anywho, we are back with another week. Just to warn all the listeners out there, this is being recorded a couple of weeks ahead, just as we're trying to get ourselves ahead on the schedule.
So if there's a nuclear apocalypse, a terrorist attack, we haven't heard about it yet.
So, yeah. Good luck to you all. This may just auto-release into a void, possibly.
Only to the cockroaches.
Indeed. In our new flattened world. But on a brighter note, first off, we are going to we're going to ask each other a question. So normally this is the point where we tell you to go and follow Untitled Film Podcast. And
yes, on the socials, you'd go on the Facebook, on the Instagram, and you'd follow that, and there'd be a question for you.
But this week, we are not following Untitled Film Podcast. This week, we are recording 2 weeks ahead, so we haven't asked you a question yet. So instead, we're going to ask each other a question. And in the theme, part of the theme of this week's podcast is about Nicolas Cage. So in this question, I'm going to ask you, Callum, what is your favourite and what is the worst Nick Cage films performances that you've seen? So let's do favourite first.
Oh gosh, that's actually a really tough choice because I think that he's both brilliant in his Wild and Crazy and also in his more, subdued and Oscar baity kind of stuff. So, gosh, this is quite an out there choice, but I think that the performance in Vampire's Kiss is excellently on point. He's the only one who seems to get that the movie's supposed to be a comedy. And so all the crazy stuff like, I've never misfiled anything. A, B, C, that whole stuff. It's perfect. He knows exactly what he's doing. But also, just to throw in a sort of more serious, awardsy kind of one, I really love him in Adaptation.
You bastard.
So, which is your favourite?
I'm going to say Adaptation. I really like the duality of him actually playing two very different roles and two very different characters, and one quite understated, one quite overstated. And unfortunately, you stole my idea.
There are no stolen ideas here. Two people can have the same favourite thing, but we didn't answer the other question, which was the worst one.
Yeah, what do you think the worst one is? This could be the same as well.
Oh my gosh.
There's so many to choose from.
Genuinely hard to think of, because I sort of do love everything about him, like even when he's not good. Like, I mean, the safe answer would be The Wicker Man. So I think I'm just going to go for The Wicker Man just because I find some of the kind of other performances where people say, oh, that's the worst Nicolas Cage, evs. And like, I think of it like, don't throw things at me, you bloody person. But no, I really like Crazy Nick, and that's the one. So actually, no, I'll change it to something like The Sorcerer's Apprentice, because he's just cashing in a check there. Because at least with The Wicker Man, it doesn't work, but he's trying something. He's trying to be out there, just trying to be crazy, and it's a bit too safe. So I'll just go for one of his clearly bored, cashing in a paycheck, not really interested. So let's say The Sorcerer's Apprentice. Even that's not terrible.
Yeah, I kind of would agree. Like, I mean, there's bad Nicolas Cage, but normally bad Nicolas Cage is him trying, and it's the phoning it in Nicolas, as Mark Gabo once put it, the horse face phoning in Nicolas Cage, which is the the worst one. And I think that was for The Knowing, and I think that's what I'm going to say is my worst Nicolas Cage performance, because he's just like the numbers I know and things and where's my money. It just feels like that.
There are a series of Nicolas Cage performances in the
second National Treasure movie.
Yeah, mid 2000s, where he just clearly
Ghost Rider 1
he didn't care.
I like the fact as well. He was like, I'm not working with Disney anymore. No, Disney's not having you anymore, Nicholas. Like, you just phoned in.
Now that he's having his comeback, I'm sure they will eventually.
True. And that brings us on. So nicely to our films of the week. What films are we going to be talking about this week, Callum?
We are going to be talking about The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, which is the ironic Nicolas Cage film where he plays himself as a sort of down on his luck actor. And there is a link to the other movie that we're going to be watching, the slightly older one, which is Paddington 2.
Again, slightly. We've had a couple of weeks of this, but
do you think we should save it for the review as to why they link?
Yeah, I think we should.
Yeah, because let's not spoil that because it is good fun. Well, let's not spoil it until we spoil it a bit later.
Absolutely. And yes, with that, let's go into the news. So what is your first piece of news this week, Callum?
Hang on, I'm just getting it up. I've forgotten now. So there is going to be a sequel to Night of the Living Dead. Now, if you're confused and think, hang about, wasn't there already a sequel called Dawn of the Dead, and then Day of the Dead, and then Land of the Dead, and then the remakes, and then all the other stuff? Well, this is going to be Night of the Living Dead 2, not to confuse anyone. So it's a hot AFM package for buyers to gnaw on. Night of the Living Dead sequel from Village Roadshow, Vertigo, Westbrook, and George Romero's Sanibel Studios. So they are officially going to be making a film that follows directly on from Night of the Living Dead rather than just being... I suppose it makes sense in a way because Dawn of the Dead takes place within the same universe, but it's a completely different story, and Day of the Dead is a completely different story. They're kind of taking place within the same zombie apocalypse in completely different pockets of America. So I presume the gist I get from this article is that they're going to be following directly on as soon as Night of the Living Dead ended, 1968. The story is going to follow on straight from there. So it is going to be a direct sequel. But it does sound like beating a dead horse, this.
Yeah, absolutely.
It looks like George Romero's widow is cashing in. And, good luck to her. Because, her husband is not around anymore. He can't make the films. So why not? Make that money while you still can, I say.
Fair enough.
And what about you? What's your first bit of news?
So my first piece of news is a TV series, but from a movie director. There is a new series that's going to be on Peacock called Poker Face. Have you seen anything about this?
I've seen the trailer, yes.
It is Natasha Lyonne is the lead character, who I love. And she is someone who can tell if someone's lying, and it's kind of a murder mystery directed by Mr. Rian Johnson, who of
Glass Onion and Knives Out and Star Wars: The Last Jedi and a bunch of other really nifty
many
films.
Things. But obviously with the whole Knives Out series very much in that kind of murder mystery vibe at the minute. And the trailer looks excellent, full of lots of big names, and I'm quite excited for it.
I understand it's harking back to Columbo and Murder Mysteries of the Week, where every week there's going to be a famous baddie, and it's obvious who the baddie's going to be because he's the only name you know. It's going to be one of those things like Columbo, like, oh, well, it's obviously that guy. You saw him at the start, and he's the only one played by Leonard Nimoy or whoever it might be, or Johnny Cash that week.
And this is a little synopsis for it. So, Leone stars as Charlie Cully, who has an extraordinary ability to determine whether someone is lying. She hits the road with her Plymouth Barracuda, and with every stop encounters a new cast of characters and strange crimes she can't help but solve. Exciting.
Sounds really fun.
Yeah, I'm quite excited for it. So that's piece of news number one. And for yourself, what is piece of news number dos?
Well, this is a bit of a mixed bag for me because I don't like the director, but I do like the story. So Henry Cavill and Isa Gonzalez to lead Guy Ritchie's World War II action spy pick. Exactly.
Guy Ritchie.
Guy Ritchie is very boring, but it's about the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. Have you heard of these people?
No.
It was a spy network in the Second World War led by a very colourful cast of characters. It was you had Winston Churchill knew about it, but also Ian Fleming was part of it. They recruited people who were slightly well known. It's before he became famous. Christopher Lee was a Nazi hunter for this group. So there was a real group of Nazis, super spies, like super spies. These were the hot, cool spies that you sent in. And you can understand maybe where Ian Fleming, who later went on to write the James Bond series, perhaps got the idea of a super spy. And these guys were just like Inglourious Bastards, but English. They were Nazi killers. They weren't messing about. They weren't hiding in trees and waiting to report back. They were waiting to jump out of the tree, slit throats. These were bad dudes. And I've heard about this story before. Well, Christopher Lee's spoken about it in interviews. Ian Fleming spoke about it. And it's just such a shame that it's Guy Ritchie doing it, because I really do love this story. He's also pairing with Jerry Bruckheimer, who's producing. And I think the idea is, if it's a hit, it's going to be a new series for him. He really wants to make this his next sort of franchise. So I like the story. I like Henry Cavill. I like Isaac Gonzalez. I really love the bit of history. Guy Ritchie.
It's like I feel like he's looked at the Kingsman and gone, I want a franchise like that. Although, let's be honest, Kingsman seem to have pattered out into nothingness now.
Unfortunately, yes.
But yeah, poor old Taron, although I think he's got enough things going for him, so it's not the end of the world.
I think he's fine. I think he's got what he needed from Kingsman, and now he's off doing his own thing.
Absolutely. And then my second piece of news is... What are
you doing?
Tom Hanks is back on SNL as David Pumpkins.
I'm David Pumpkins, man.
So 2 weeks late, you'll be getting this news. But if anyone liked the David Pumpkins sketch from SNL, which I always find like genius, but also awful at the same time, it like lives in that weird land of good and bad at the same time. He's back doing pretty much exactly the same sketch, but with some of the new cast.
It's always good fun. Always good to see him there.
So yeah,
hot timely news there.
It will be. It's hot timely news today.
We really have our fingers on the pulse.
We are recording it the day after that happened. But
yes,
you'll be listening to it about 10 days after it happened.
I really apologise for anyone who's downloaded this.
Anyway, on to the movies.
Oh, it's the magic.
Well, the magic may happen. So, what is our first movie, Callum?
It is The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, starring Nicolas Cage. Nicolas Cage plays himself. He's at a low ebb in his career. It's probably taken around the time where he was doing all those straight-to-DVD films. He can't get a job for love nor money. His agent is played by Neil Patrick Harris, and they think that kind of the last resort, because he's kind of wasted all these other opportunities. No one really wants to put him in his movies. He's just kind of burnt too many bridges. But there is a superfan on an island, played by Pedro Pascal. And, people aren't sure what this guy's about. He thinks he's just this kind of cool guy. He doesn't know. He knows that he's super rich. He knows he's willing to pay him several $1 million to attend his birthday party. But he just doesn't think much more about it until he realizes that maybe this guy, played by Pedro Pascal, is maybe a bit more dangerous than he seems. And an adventure, which is both funny and exciting, starts off for Nicolas Cage at a low point in his life. And so, Johnny, what did you think of The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent?
I liked it.
Very conservative.
Yeah, I thought it was very well acted. I think it's probably just the thing that Nicolas Cage needs at this point in his career. He's obviously had Mandy and Pig and stuff that have kind of rebuilt his indie cred, and this is a little bit higher budget and stars Pedro and things like that. So, it's I think it works really well from that point of view. It's very funny. It's very meta. At points, like really meta. There's some bits in it where they're basically describing what's going to happen later into this film they're writing, and you almost can't pull out the film they're writing within the film and the film that you're watching. Pedro Pascal is really good, as ever, is really good fun. And I think let him play a bit of a lighter role as well. And yeah, really enjoyed his character. Some great little cameos, really great cast all round. Very well written, very well funny. The direction's pretty plain. I wouldn't say there's anything particularly special about the direction. But no, I think overall it's a funny, meta, silly movie that's the kind of thing that would, it's his JCVD or something, the kind of thing that kind of would help someone's career who maybe had gone the wrong direction for a little bit.
This certainly is the kind of movie that an actor needs when they have hit a slump, because like you said, he's had a few indie hits, but in order to get a proper comeback going, you sort of need to do the one film where you are a bit self-deprecating. Like Mel Gibson keeps trying to make that movie, but no one's paying to see Mel Gibson in the movie for love nor money. But Nicolas Cage is someone that people like, and he was kind of in the right place at the right time. He'd done the indie movies. He's clearly on an upswing, and he needed a studio film, especially a studio comedy, where he got to sort of set fire to that image that he'd been cultivating in this straight to DVD of the screaming Nicolas Cage, like we made fun of at the start. I'm Nick fucking Cage. It's funny that you should mention.
I love the way you went
Nick
Cage.
fucking Cage. It's funny you should mention Saturday Night Live, because if there's a problem with these kinds of movies, and there's been several movies like this, like I mentioned Mel Gibson, he was in a film called The Beaver, which was his attempt at doing the self-deprecating image of, look, here's Mel Gibson, but we're setting fire to the image of Mel Gibson. They always stretch themselves to fit a 92-hour running time. And it does at times feel like maybe this film should have been a sketch comedy TV show or a sketch on that Saturday Night Live. At times, it's just a bit too thin for the material given. And there's two examples I can think of. These films tend to be action comedies. And you said that the direction is flat, and it is. Direction that's flat doesn't so much matter for spoken comedy, because if the people are funny enough, then that will carry it. And it does in the bits where Pedro and Nicholas are chatting with one another. They're fine. It's very funny, very amusing. But when it gets to the action part, it's just any other kind of dull action comedy with not very well-directed action. And that's at least half an hour of the movie. And especially towards the end.
It doesn't look, it almost looks like the Sweeney or something, like Nick, whatever his name is.
Nick Love?
Yeah, Nick Love kind of lazily directed action. The action feels tacked on. It's there as part of the joke. It's not there for any reason. Where actually, if it wanted to really elevate itself as a movie, it would have nailed that too.
It does get to a point where you get to about 45 minutes in, and then the film sort of starts to bleed out and lose any kind of... The charm that it had been coasting on is starting to peter out. But the Nicolas Cage and Pedro Pascal are charming enough individuals that for the 45 minutes where it is chatting, it is good. Another area where it feels like it's just stalling for time to get to a 90-minute runtime is there are these hallucinations where he's talking to a younger version of himself.
Yeah,
and that's the fellow that says, I'm Nick fucking Cage. And it's done with that sort of creepy... technology where you can put a younger face onto an actor, and it never quite looks good. He looks weird and pasty, as they always do, like Robert De Niro in The Irishman, or anytime they've tried this technology. I forget the name of it. Oh, deepfake. Yeah. Deepfake technology. It just looks a bit off. So the film has a good 45 minutes in it, where it's Pedro, who's the internet's, or was at least in 2020, the internet's boyfriend, and Nicolas Cage, the internet's granddad. Two lovable figures that millennials unironically love, but also ironically love in a completely different way. Kind of setting fire to this public image that we've all had a good giggle at in the past. We've all made fun of Nicolas Cage. We've all made fun of screaming Nicolas Cage. And then the film just starts to limp to the finish line, and it can't quite... It really does stumble towards the end.
Yeah, it also becomes too obvious at points. So you keep thinking it's going to zag when it zigs, or vice versa and stuff, and then it just zigs when it zigs, and it zags when it zags, and you're like, oh, okay, that was the obvious thing to happen in this moment. And there's a point at the end which is meant to be maybe quite emotional and quite kind of drive the plot along, and you kind of just don't really care. I don't really care about certain characters in it, and some of the kind of bits that are meant to push the story along all feel very kind of like thrown in to push the story along, because otherwise it's just like Pedro Pascal and Nicolas Cage like falling in love with each other, basically.
And I would have watched that.
Yeah, I'd have watched that, but still, it's not... I think maybe they should have done an hour and a half of that instead of an hour and 50 minutes or something else.
Yeah.
And I do think that there were bits that I kind of zoned out of a little bit.
The whole crime subplot about Pedro Pascal, is he dodgy? Is he not dodgy? Is he in league with these gangsters? Is he not? I couldn't care less. I would have preferred it if he was just an eccentric, rich person who was obsessed with Nicolas Cage. That would have been better.
But I also kind of feel the same whole thing with the daughter storyline and things. And then, again, this is the new movie, so we can't give too much away, but they try and make that as a plot point towards the end of the movie, and it just doesn't quite work in my mind.
And I do wonder if Nicolas Cage just saw this as a stepping stone, because it does feel like it's a stepping stone. It's to get him back into studio films, which he is now. He's been cast in Universal's Renfield, playing Dracula, and I think he's got a few other things in the pipeline where that aren't straight to DVD films. And I wonder if this was the kind of, he needed a thing like this. He'd done the indies, he needed to do a studio comedy to get back into proper studio films. I wonder if this was the film that was just a way of him going, okay, set fire to the public image. That sounds fun. I'll do that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it is one of those kind of weird, like, one of those outlier movies that is a little bit, his agent read the script and said, this is good. I think the interview I saw said he knew the director before anyway, and the director wrote the part for him, which I suppose you have to with a movie like this. And he was like, yes, this is probably what I need to be doing right now. And the rest is history. And it is fun. I watched it on a plane, shockingly, because that's my life. And yeah, it was a very plain movie. It worked perfectly on a plane. When someone was serving me lunch, say, and you'd be like, if I miss 10 minutes of it while I'm sorting that out, it's not the end of the world and things. And yeah, that's probably how I would look at it. But no, it was good fun. Well acted, good little fun storyline, but maybe doesn't have the staying power for however long it is.
And it certainly pales in comparison to something like JCVD, which was a bit more serious in its approach to how it killed the image and the ego of a certain Mr. Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Yeah.
This one was a bit more cuddly towards Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. And whereas obviously those two were both quite self-referential, I suppose, with Sly's kind of trying to come back thing, The Expendables, actually that was, was more of a movie, pretty terrible movie, but more of a movie, whereas this was kind of like a weird meta thing, like you kind of alluded to. If it was a 10-minute SNL sketch, that's probably how it would have worked best. Or
absolutely.
I don't know how it would work as a 45-minute TV program, but a 45-minute TV program, that's how it would have worked best. And it was a bit weird that it was quite a long movie, but yeah, it was fun.
And why is it that we're going to be talking about Paddington 2 in relation to The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent?
Well, there is a conversation in the movie. What's your favourite movie? And one of the movies that Pedro's character comes up with is Paddington 2, which he forces Nicolas Cage to watch, and Nicolas Cage falls in love with.
Absolutely. As all good humans do.
Exactly. Absolutely. The number one movie of all time, according to Rotten Tomatoes, from a critic's reviewing point of view.
It slit the throat of Citizen Kane and left it for dead.
Absolutely. And, yeah.
I guess we'll be needing a plot summary sometime this decade.
Well, maybe I'll think about it. But first, I want to ask you, Callum, what is your favourite movie of all time and why?
Oh, God. I hate questions like that. It's When Harry Met Sally.
Wow. And why?
The perfect screenplay. It is the perfect romantic comedy. It's funny. It's witty. It's intelligently told. The two characters have a lot of chemistry. And it's spread out over many years, and each kind of plot point is separated by this kind of fake interview with an older couple, and with each of the older couples talk about how they were separated for a long time and then they met later on in life. And it's sweet, it's funny, it's romantic, it's the perfectly written script, it's perfectly acted. And because I'm a horror fan, a lot of times I try to tell people that my favorite film, it's RoboCop. Yeah, it's RoboCop, which is in my top 10. But if I'm actually honest with myself, it's absolutely When Harry Met Sally. Not a question about it. What about yourself?
Wouldn't you like to know? So, Paddington 2.
Bastard.
The story of a bear. No, I'll tell you. It's probably Dr. Strangelove.
Great choice.
It is incredibly well acted by Peter Sellers. Great script. Do you notice that I said The Shining was my favourite?
Yes, your favourite horror film.
I'm a massive Kubrick fan. I love his direction. But yeah, I think it's really well shot. Peter Sellers is great in playing all the multiple characters. And I just really like that hard-biting political satire because I love the thick of it. I love that. That's kind of my jam. So yeah, I think it works. It's quite serious, but also hilarious, visually stunning. It did a lot of things that kind of, it was the first to do them and stuff as well. So, no, really love Doctor Strangelove, but you could ask me another day and I'll say Apocalypse Now, and you ask me another day and I'll say something. There's lots of...
That's the thing. I hate questions like this.
Yeah. Which is actually one of the points in the movie that Nicolas Cage says.
Yes, he does.
But yeah, so no, absolutely. Let's move on. So, Paddington DOS.
Yes.
So why, Callum, first off, are we not talking about Paddington 1?
Paddington 1 is very good. It's excellent. It's very funny. It sets up the kind of whole family dynamic of the Browns and Paddington very well. And it's very good. I'd give it an 8 out of 10 on any good day. And, it's a very solid franchise starter. I watch it any day of the week. Paddington 2, however, is perfect. It is one of the best films this decade. I will not debate people about this.
Last decade now. But
last decade. Oh, yes, gosh. Yeah. How time moves. But of the decade it was released, it is one of the best, if not the best, of that decade. It's perfect in every way. And I will hurt people if they say otherwise.
Yeah. So, synopsis. Paddington 2, he's a bear. In Paddington 1, he arrived in London town.
Still is a bear.
From deepest, darkest Peru. He's sent there by his grandmother and grandfather, I want to say.
No, it's Uncle Pazuzu
and
aunt and his aunt. Yeah,
sent by his uncle and aunt to London town because Peru's not safe. I can't remember. There's a reason. I think it's originally was a metaphor for kids that were sent to London or sent away from London in the war. And he turns up in Paddington Station. He's not called Paddington at the time. Has a little tag on him saying, "Please, will someone adopt me?" And the Brown family turn up and adopt him. And because they found him in Paddington Station, they call him Paddington, the bear. And hijinks ensues. He loves marmalade. He likes marmalade sandwiches. He likes the Browns. And doesn't really understand our modern indoor human ways of life. And he has... incredible hijinks in the first movie. In the second movie, he's now gotten into London life. He knows everyone. He's like top dog of the street, top bear, some would say. And
boom, boom.
Friends with all of the other critters and people around. And everyone but...
Mr. Curry.
Is that Mr. Curry?
That's Peter Capaldi.
Yeah, Peter Capaldi, who doesn't like that bear. Don't trust him. Don't trust bears. Don't like things that don't come from around these parts. But other than that, everyone on the street loves him. And then they go to a beautiful mechanical steam fair. And who should be at this mechanical steam fair? It is an old actor played by Hugh Grant, stretching himself very far there, playing an old actor. And this actor is up to something. He is trying to find this hidden gold that supposedly was something to do with his family in the past. And young Paddington may have that key in this book that he's been saving up for to show to his aunt. What's her name?
I forgot the name of the aunt. I know it's Uncle Pazuzu, but the aunt slips my mind.
Yes. But anyway, yeah. He wants to send this book to his aunt to show her what London town is really like. But is framed for its robbery. Bum, bum, bum. And ends up in prison with Knuckles McGinty. And then the story goes on from there. That's my synopsis.
That's very well told. Yeah, we got there in the end. I was thinking at some point...
Two whole movies.
I was thinking, that's a good synopsis of Paddington 1. Are we going to be talking about Paddington 2 at any point? But no, the thing that works about this movie is it's so light-footed. It has a very kinetic energy to it. Like in the opening, there's quite a long tracking shot when Paddington leaves the house and meets all of his friends on the street, and he interacts with each one of them.
Who are all pretty much British character actors or comedians.
Yeah. So you have people like Sanjeev Bhaskar and Robbie Gee, and a bunch of people that you've seen a lot. If you watch a lot of British TV or movies, you've seen pretty much all of these people. Ben Mills is another one, and Jessica Hines. And it's quite a long tracking shot, and the whole film skips along with this kind of very high energy. And if anything, it's probably one of the ways in which it improves on the first Paddington, which again was very fun and had a lot of energy. But I think the director is Paul King, and I think he kind of up the ante for this one in terms of like the energy that I have for the first one. I'm going to double it for this one. And the whole film has this very light-footed, adventurous feel to it. Like every scene, like you said, he wants to buy this pop-up book from his friend who runs a antique shop.
Played by
Jim Broadbent.
Exactly.
And
British character actor.
Yes, another British character actor. He needs £50 for it, so he starts doing odd jobs. He works for a barber, and hijinks ensue.
Cleans a window,
hijinks ensue. But every one of them is directed with this kind of like, every scene is directed with this idea of how can we wring a laugh or two out of the audience and make it a good-natured laugh. It isn't like last week we reviewed the film The Bad Guys, which is for children, and it had a little bit of an identity crisis of, let's talk about Tarantino, let's do a reference to Tarantino here, and then add a fart joke here, which is how most children's films and family films do it. It's like, let's put in something for dad and something for the kids. Well, here is a film that does everything for everyone. It's just, if you like slapstick comedy and well-directed, well-acted slapstick comedy, then you're going to like this film and you're going to like the energy that it brings to it. And yes, it just has wonderful energy.
Yeah, I completely agree. There's a great line. Pedro Pascal's character in it says in the
unbearable weight of massive talent,
whatever it's called, stupid little name. There's a moment in it where Pedro Pascal's character goes, "It made me want to be a better person," and it is that. You watch Paddington, you're like, "Oh my god, if I could be like this bear, I'd be the greatest person who's ever lived." Like, he's just so nice, and he's the best of all of us, and he just sees the best in everyone. And you know, there's a moment in it when Paddington loses hope, and I lose hope. I lose hope in society. I think it's also just a really lovely representation of like London, and kind of like, that's the London I'd like to live in. Like, just really like friendly, multicultural, where people all get along and colourful and happy, and everyone loves life. And if someone doesn't love life, this little bear will come in and make them love life. And that is, you know, the best.
It's also, this film is just a way, you know, you talk about this film with anyone in the world and you've made a friend. Recent experience, during kind of lockdown and later on, I went on a website. It's like a pen pals website, just because I was bored. I needed something to do while everyone was indoors, and started sending a few messages out to kind of, you know, people, pen pals with the hopes, and like, it's all random chit chat for the longest time. It's like, oh yeah, how is it over in your part of the world? And then eventually, I noticed that she'd been to London and had a bunch of Paddington stuff, because real Anglophile. And I just said, "Oh, you love Paddington too? You love Paddington as well?" "Yeah, I love Paddington as well." And like you said, it makes people want to be a better person. It has a similar thing. One of my favorite movies is the 1975 Richard Donner Superman. And you know, you watch Superman, you think, if I could be more like that, wouldn't the world be lovely and sweet? And this is another thing. It's a film that's so lovely that, you know, anywhere you go in the world, it's international currency. You just have to say, "Paddington 2? Paddington 2? Yes, Paddington 2. Paddington 2? Paddington 2. That's a conversation right there. And I've made friends. I've made a friend because of this movie. And, you know, that's just the wonderful thing. So few movies have that charm.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that I want to say is it's really well shot. It's beautiful. Like, it looks like a bit like a Wes Anderson movie, but maybe slightly more, dare I say, colourful?
Colourful and kinetic.
Yeah.
Wes Anderson is more kind of stilted, deliberately so.
Yeah, exactly. But it's kind of got that kind of storybook feel, but it's everything kind of glows. And like a great example, talking about that steam fair, the way that everything there is done and the way it's all lit so well, all the costumes and every kind of character is as you'd expect them. Like, some of the costumes and some of the clothes that Hugh Grant's actor character wears are just amazing. There's a whole plot point in it with him where he now does dog food commercials and has to dress up as a dog, and it's just genius. Like, the costume he wears is so perfect and it's so funny, and all the acting is kind of over the top, but it is such a good way. And just little thing like the way the prison is directed and shot, and Gleeson as Donald Gleeson, not Donald, Brendan Gleeson. Donald's the son. I'm gonna say again, Brendan Gleeson. He's kind of shot, and you know, the kind of kind of close-up shots of people's faces and the reactions and how it kind of the colours and the lighting changes as people's mood changes, and it just works on every level. And I don't think, and this is something I never say about a film, it's like the perfect length. There's not a minute wasted, but there's not a minute too short either. It's like everything about it, this film is just perfect.
It's flawless. And, it's also extends to the writing. There's a lot of very witty wordplay, especially with the character of Knuckles. Oh, you don't do nothing for nobody for nothing. And, or the bit where Knuckles is introducing Paddington's introducing Knuckles and the gang, because everywhere he goes, Paddington makes friends, even like these hardened criminals, and he's introducing the gang. It's like, This is Knuckles, Jimmy the Snitch, Two Bob Johnny, and Sir Geoffrey Wilcott. I hope I can rely on your votes.
Yeah.
Who would come up with that?
And it's just perfect. It's like such a British kind of thing. That's like every British prison's got a Tory MP who's been in a sex scandal or stolen some money in there, surely.
And we haven't mentioned Hugh Grant much. This is a film similar to Nicolas Cage in The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. Recently, Hugh Grant has been reinventing himself as a sort of weirdo character actor. It's not just Paddington 2, but it's been about half a decade of stuff that's come out where he's been doing the best work of his career.
And he's always incredibly enjoyable.
It's always incredibly enjoyable. But here, he's just taking it by the reins. So if I'm going to be a villain in a family film, I am going to be a villain. And he's smug and self-entitled. And he has these sequences where he goes up to his attic because he's an actor. He has all his old costumes. And he does the voices for each of them, like, and Poirot, like, don't you do that. Oh, be quiet, this character. But you can't do that. Be quiet, Macbeth. It's like, who would come up with this dialogue, like, other than a genius? And it's just such a shame that Paul King, because he's moving on to other films, he's directing the Willy Wonka prequel. The third film is not going to be directed by Paul King. And
but he is still staying on as producer and co-writer, I think?
He is, I believe he is, yes. With Simon Farnaby is the co-writer. And Simon Farnaby, you might know, he's one of the writing team for Horrible Histories and Ghosts.
Yeah.
And an incredibly funny guy as part of a very funny writing troupe. And any screenplay...
Stop that luscious nun.
Yeah. Stop that stunning sister.
That's it. Stop that stunning sister.
And he's an incredibly funny man. He's an incredibly funny writer. You've seen him in a bunch of British comedies over the years. Yeah. But Horrible Histories had a similar thing to Paddington, where when Paddington first came out, people said, this film is not going to be a big hit. It's going to be fine for kids. And it was brilliant. And the same with Horrible Histories. It went above and beyond. And it's one of those kids' comedy TV shows that is just considered the highest of the highest regards because of its wit and its writing and its inventiveness. He brings that same charm to it. And Paul King, as the director, escalates that charm.
Yeah. The comic timing's perfect. The acting's perfect. And there's so many people we haven't talked about, like Hugh Bonneville and Ben Whishaw and Sally...
Sally Hawkins.
Sally Hawkins, can't remember her last name then. And they all act their roles perfectly and are hilarious and have great jokes as well. And yeah, just there's so many little... And it's very good. It's very good at kind of leaving a little crumb of something here, a setup, and you're not really even noticing it's a setup. And then 45 minutes later, it coming out and being important. Hugh Bonneville's character has a few great ones of those.
That's just great screenwriting. Yeah. It's so underrated as a skill to set up and pay off. Set up and pay off. It's so necessary, but people don't notice it until it happens.
Yeah. It always reminds me of that BoJack joke in one of the seasons where there's all these strainers in a Mr. Peanut Butter buys all these like pasta strainers for some reason, and they just sat in the house, and he keeps mentioning, I can't remember why I bought these. But the longer the joke, the bigger the payoff. And literally through the whole season, they keep getting mentioned. And then in the last episode, there's a big payoff. And it is, obviously that's very signposting it and very screenwritery, but it is that kind of, it does do that incredibly well. I'd also like to say the animation of Paddington's perfect. Like, obviously it's not a huge budget, these movies. I think, maybe $60 million?
Within that sort of range, yeah.
And in that budget, you can go so wrong and try and either make it too photorealistic or too cartoony, so it doesn't make sense. They've managed to get that balance just right. There's no moments in it where you think, oh, they've had to rush that bit of animation. Like the way his eyes are done is so perfect. He tells a lot through his eyes about what mood he's in and how he's feeling, and that's done so well. And that's something that's so often done terribly
for animation too.
Yeah,
so it has to be wet, it has to be puffy. Depending on the scene, there's lots of jokes that's like, please, Mr. Gruber, be serious. And he's got puffy fur.
Yeah. It is. There's some really just, it's just so wholesome and nice. And you just don't get this very often in movies. It's just, I love it.
It puts a spring in your step. It makes you want to wear your hat at a jaunty angle. It makes you want to dance down the street and say good morning to all the strangers that you meet.
Yeah. It was quite interesting. Originally, who was going to? It was going to be
Colin Firth
voicing Paddington, which would have. He doesn't have that kind of youthful wonder about him, whereas Ben Whishaw can do that can do that youthful wonder
yes, he has
so well.
A sense of awe to everything he sees and does.
Yeah, he really does, and wow, kind of vibe, and
the emotional payoff too, because of course the whole thing is set up around buying this this book for his mum. His aunt. Jesus,
we'll get there eventually.
And he can't get it.
Speaking of payoffs,
and he doesn't get it in time, and then because this is a spoiler episode, there's a knock at the door, and who is it? Oh my god!
It makes me want to cry.
Not a dry eye in the house.
Followed by the best, fuck Marvel, the best post-credit scene of all time.
Yeah. Listen to the rain on the roof go clip, clippity clap, clip, clippity clap.
Yeah. It's just amazing. Perfect. Everything about it is
a perfect movie.
So perfect. And just like Us, Hugh Grant's character needed a captive audience. I think I'm going to wrap it up there.
Yeah, I think that's probably best.
Otherwise we're just going to be like us going, I love it. I love it. It's so good.
It's amazing.
So, Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. Out of 10.
Fortunately, despite the efforts of Pedro Pascal and Nicolas Cage, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. It really does bleed out kind of long before it should. And when it does bleed out, it just becomes an uninteresting action comedy that's just a bit dull.
I think I liked it more than that. Maybe because I watched it on a plane and it's plane level movie. I just like the idea and the story and stuff. But like you say, I think the last half hour, 45 minutes, it got a bit lazy. Didn't stick to the shtick, so we say. I'm going to give it a 6. Maybe that's generous, but I'm feeling generous today. So I guess give it a 6. That gives it overall 5 out of 10.
Yep.
Between the two of us. And Paddington 2.
Well, 0. No, it's 10 out of 10. It's perfect. It's one of the best movies of the decade. Probably very high in my favorite movies, just generally. If I had to make a ranking list, it's probably within the top 30 or 40. It's just perfect. It's a perfect film. 10 out of 10. Everything about it is wonderful.
I, too, am going to give it 10 out of 10. It is one of my favourite movies of all time. That's not hyperbole, like it genuinely is. Yeah. It's one of those. I have a list of those movies that some of them aren't always that highly rated, like High Fidelity and things, but a kind of movie that if I'm in a bad mood or whatever, I would put on. And it's in that list, but actually it's still like amazing. It's still so well done. I can understand why it's the highest rated movie of all time on Rotten Tomatoes, because of the way that Rotten Tomatoes works. It's if it gets a positive review, it gets, it doesn't matter what the percentage of the positive review is. And if you were to give it a negative review, you'd be a moron. So I think that the whole world doesn't want to be a moron. So I think everyone I've ever known who's ever seen it has loved it. I think it's one of those films that people watch over and over again. And it's rare you say it. You say it maybe some Pixar movies and things, but it's perfect family entertainment. There's bits that Gran will laugh at. There's bits that 30-year-olds will laugh at parents. There's bits that...
But that's the wonderful thing. It's
15-year-olds will laugh at.
Everyone's laughing at the same bits.
Exactly.
It's not put a Godfather joke in for dad, put a fart joke in for the kids, put in this bit for mum. It's just
good, clean
everything
fun.
Is good. Everything is perfect about it.
And then there's the occasional thing that's like the... I hope you'll have my vote, and stuff like that, that are maybe more skewed at parents, or there's bits about grumpy teenagers that are more the grumpy teenagers and embarrassing parents, and there's different bits that maybe lean towards each other, but everyone still can find funny. And they didn't cost much to make, and they make a load of money, which proves the quality of them.
And this film, it really is international currency. Say if you're ever somewhere in the world and you're with someone and the conversation isn't going well, just say Paddington 2 and you'll have a friend for life.
It's quite interesting. I can't remember who it was, but they were talking about the Home Alone remake last Christmas on Conan's podcast.
Yes.
And whoever it was on there, they were talking about, it's really good family fun. And I don't know how the conversation got there. They were like, yeah, but it's no Paddington 2. Yeah, no, it's not Paddington 2. Nothing is Paddington 2. And I've seen like multiple people talking about it on like late night talk shows. Like it's one of those things that people just know. If you like films at all, or you have kids, or you have a family, and you just mention the words Paddington 2, people are like, oh my God, it's so good.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference between Paddington 1 and 2. 1 is really well done. It's funny. But I think that kind of they've managed to just tighten it up that little bit. They've obviously got a little bit more money to play with. So the direction is slightly better. And then I think, sorry to Keira Knightley, but Hugh Grant is just the best bad guy.
Nicole Kidman.
Nicole Kidman, sorry.
She's fine. She's serviceable.
Yeah, but she's maybe just not that.
She's
and
just
it's not
that
her. Yeah, it's, the writing for her character and things is just so. Whereas, yeah, the writing for Hugh Grant is amazing, and what he does with it is amazing.
My God, he's a weirdo.
So yeah, that is us crooning about Paddington 2 for a good 15-20 minutes there. So, on that massive piece of go watch, if you haven't seen Paddington 2, get and watch it now. If you have seen Paddington 2,
doing with
get
your
and watch
life
it now.
if you haven't watched Paddington 2.
And go have some fun at Coconut Shy. Bye.
Bye. Listen to the rain on the roof go clip, clippity clap, clip, clippity clap.